On July 23rd, 2007, news of an unspeakable tragedy spread across the town of Cheshire, Connecticut. 3 innocent people were left dead and another severely injured in the wake of a brutal home invasion. It all began with a trip to the grocery store, greed for money, and a sick sexual desire. The evening before, on a quiet Sunday, 48-year-old Jennifer Hawk Petite and her 11-year-old daughter, Michaela, took a trip to their local stop shop. Michaela was going to make her family dinner, and the two needed to pick up some ingredients for the occasion. They couldn't have known that they would catch the eye of Joshua Komisarjevsky. He had a fascination with the Petite's money and a dark interest in young Michaela, so he followed the two of them home. For the horrors that were to follow, Joshua wasn't working alone. He brought an accomplice, Stephen Hayes, who, though presenting as a man at the time, has since come out as a transgender woman, in on the plan. Based on a text message exchange between the two, "I'm chomping at the bit to get started." The duo seemed excited by the prospect of their illicit activities. According to a confession that would later come from Hayes, he claimed that the pair's original intention was only to rob the Petite home, but things clearly spiraled out of control before the ordeal was through. Komisarjevsky and Hayes planned to invade the Petite home in the middle of the night to score some cash. They'd allegedly agreed to tie the family up, but leave them otherwise unharmed. But upon their arrival at the property in the early morning hours of July 23rd, they found Dr. William Petite asleep on the sunroom couch and a baseball bat by the basement stairs. Komisarjevsky wielded the bat and proceeded to strike Dr. Petite 4 to 5 times. From there, Komisarjevsky and Hayes bound the doctor with rope and plastic zip ties around his wrists and ankles. Jennifer, Michaela, and the other Petite daughter, 17-year-old Haley, were apprehended in their respective rooms. Their wrists and ankles were secured to bedposts, while pillowcases were slipped over their heads. After an initial search for cash, Komisarjevsky and Hayes moved Dr. Petite to bind him to a support pole. A second phase of ransacking was frustrating for the criminals, until they found a check register with $40,000, adding kidnapping to their growing list of offenses. Hayes took Jennifer and brought her to the bank. She demanded the mother withdraw $15,000 under threat of further harm coming to her family. Once the money was obtained, Hayes returned to the Petite home with Jennifer. Shortly after, Hayes raped and strangled Jennifer to death. Meanwhile, Komisarjevsky was engaging in his own despicable spree. He raped young Michaela, turning her last moments into a time of complete horror. Horrors, which he documented on his cell phone. Afterwards, Hayes and Komisarjevsky doused Jennifer's body and the still-living girls in gasoline, a ploy to destroy any evidence they may have left behind. The house was set ablaze, and the unfortunate Petite daughters died of smoke inhalation. And Dr. Petite was able to escape out of a hatchway in the cellar. The criminals fled the burning home in the Petite stolen car. After a bank teller, a bank employee, Mary Lyons, noticed the worrying situation with Jennifer. She had alerted the police to the situation, causing cruisers to be stationed down the street from the Petite home. In their getaway, Hayes and Komisarjevsky crashed into the police cruisers, leading to their arrests. The home invasion from hell lasted 7 hours. Komisarjevsky and Hayes had both been on parole at the time of these murders for previous burglaries. Due to the timeline of when Hayes purchased the gasoline, many believe the murder of the Petite family to have been premeditated. The lack of surveillance on the two parolees and the posting of the police, so close to the home as it was set ablaze, has led many to cast doubts upon the handling of the atrocities by the police. Once in custody, Hayes and Komisarjevsky were quick to point fingers at each other as the driving force behind this despicable set of crime. Komisarjevsky would later blame Dr. Petite for the death of his family, calling him a coward who could have saved them if he really wanted to. In 2010, Hayes was convicted of the murders and sentenced to death. Komisarjevsky was also convicted in 2011 and sentenced to death the following year. However, despite protests from the sole survivor of this massacre, these criminals never saw execution. In 2015, Connecticut abolished the death penalty, and Hayes and Komisarjevsky's sentences were commuted to life imprisonment. Justice was served, even if it wasn't to the full extent that those hurt by these severe losses might have liked. And while nothing can bring back the lives of Dr. Petite's family, their cherished memories live on. Jennifer was a nurse and co-director of the health center at a private boarding school. Haley participated in varsity cross-country, basketball, and crew, and had just graduated as a high honor roll student, all while actively fundraising for multiple sclerosis research. Michaela had plans to take over Haley's fundraising after her sister left for college, and she loved cooking for her family. In the early 1990s, police in Ohio were baffled by the seemingly random murders of hunters and fishermen across several rural counties. Someone was driving the state's wooded backroads and hunting humans with a high-powered rifle, and that someone was Thomas Lee Dillon, the Roadside Sniper who killed 5 Ohio outdoorsmen between 1989 and 1992. Dillon left little to no evidence behind when committing his crimes. Thomas Lee Dillon was born in Canton, Ohio on July 9, 1950. His father died when he was just 15 months old, and Dillon later told a psychologist that he viewed his mother as a cold woman. He had no memories of her ever hugging him, kissing him, or telling him she loved him. Ever since his youth, Thomas Dillon had enjoyed killing animals, but as an adult, he started hunting humans. As a teenager, Dillon started keeping count of the animals he'd killed on a calendar in his bedroom. Even after he graduated from Ohio State University and got a job as a draftsman at the city of Canton's water department, his alarming behaviors continued. Soon, he was killing livestock and family pets instead of turkeys and deer. Even before Dillon began his murderous crime spree, his co-workers called him Killer because he frequently bragged that he'd slaughtered over 1,000 animals. However, they never imagined that he would soon become a hunter of humans. The disturbing murders of the Roadside Snipers. The first known victim of Thomas Dillon was Donald Welling, a 35-year-old man who was jogging on the roads just a half-mile from his home in Tuscarawas County, Ohio, in April 1989. Dillon later recalled the encounter. He said, "What's up?" Just before I shot him, a voice in my head said, "Open fire on him." And I did. He killed again in November 1990. This time, his victim was 21-year-old Jamie Paxton, who had just left his house to go bow hunting. Dillon shot the young man 3 times, leaving his body in a field for his friends to find later. A year after Paxton's death, his mother wrote an open letter to her son's killer in the local newspaper. To her surprise, Dillon anonymously responded, "I am the murderer of Jamie Paxton." Jamie Paxton was a complete stranger to me. I never saw him before in my life, and he never said a word to me that Saturday. 5 minutes after I shot Paxton, I was drinking a beer and had blocked out all thoughts of what I had just done out of my mind. I thought no more of shooting Paxton than shooting a bottle at the dump. It wasn't until Dillon killed his 3rd victim, 30-year-old Kevin Loring, just weeks after Paxton, that authorities realized the murders may be connected. They had all taken place in different counties, which Dillon later admitted was done intentionally to cause jurisdictional issues. However, Dillon then shot a 4th man, Claude Hawkins, on federal land in March 1992. This caused the FBI to get involved, which eventually led to Dillon's arrest. He killed his 5th and final known victim, Gary Bradley, the following month. Then, in August 1992, the FBI released a full report and criminal profile of the suspected serial killer in a local newspaper, and it was thankfully seen by Dillon's friend, Richard Fry. How Thomas Dillon was finally brought to justice. The FBI used the anonymous letter Dillon had written about the murder of Jamie Paxton to form their detailed profile on the unidentified killer. Based on his word choices, they determined that he was a white male who was over 30 years old and had at least a high school education. They also knew that he liked to drink, owned a gun, and had a penchant for driving on rural backroads. When Richard Fry came across the profile in the local newspaper, he immediately thought of Thomas Dillon. He and Dillon were friends when they were younger, but Fry had distanced himself from the killer when he started shooting family pets and committing acts of arson. The two had reconnected years later, though, after Dillon settled down with a wife and son and seemed to have put his past behind him. However, Fry had noticed that Dillon had been acting like his old self again in recent years. According to Strange Outdoors, he even once asked Fry, "Do you realize you can go out into the country and find somebody and there are no witnesses. You can shoot them. There is no motive. You realize how easy murder would be to get away with. This unhinged behavior frightened Fry. So when he saw the profile, he immediately contacted the police to give them Dylan's name. The FBI placed Dylan under surveillance. He had been arrested in early August for using a silencer in a wilderness park, and as part of his plea deal, he agreed to give up all of his weapons. However, in November 1992, he made a purchase at a gun show. When officials were patting him down to arrest him, they found that he was carrying a handgun. This allowed them to obtain a warrant to search his home, where they hoped to find evidence that connected him to the 5 murders. While they didn't initially come across any physical evidence in his home, they did discover that he'd recently sold one of his guns. They tracked down the man who bought it and found that the weapon was the same one used to kill Dylan's final 2 victims. Once the Roadside Sniper was behind bars, police attempted to uncover his true motive. Chillingly, however, Dylan didn't seem to have one. When asked why he killed 5 complete strangers, Dylan responded, "They were just there." Thomas Dylan was arrested and charged with killing the 2 men, but in a deal to take the death penalty off the table, he later confessed to all 5 murders. He was sentenced to life in prison, and he remained behind bars until his death in 2011. At 4:20 p.m. on November 16, 1971, a 10-year-old Puerto Rican child named Carmen Cullen disappeared while returning home from an errand in Rochester, New York. According to eyewitnesses, Cullen entered the pharmacy her grandmother had instructed her to visit on West Main Street, but left the store upon learning the prescription she had been instructed to collect had not been processed, informing the store owner, Jack Corbin, "I gotta go, I gotta go, I gotta go." She was then observed entering a car parked close to the pharmacy. Cullen was reported missing to the Rochester Police Department at 7:50 p.m., approximately 50 minutes after Cullen exited the pharmacy. Scores of motorists driving along Interstate 490 observed the child, naked from the waist down, running from a reversing vehicle believed to be a dark-colored Ford Pinto hatchback, frantically waving her arms and shouting in an attempt to flag down a passing vehicle. At least one of these witnesses observed Cullen being submissively led back to this vehicle by her abductor. 2 days later, 2 teenage boys discovered Cullen's partially nude body in a gully not far from Interstate 490 and close to the village of Churchville. This location was approximately 12 miles from where Cullen had last been seen alive. Her coat was discovered in a culvert some 300 feet from her body. Her trousers were only discovered on November 30, close to the service road near where numerous motorists had observed her attempting to escape her abductor. An autopsy revealed that, in addition to having been raped, the child had suffered a fracture to her skull and one of her vertebrae before she had been manually strangled to death. Furthermore, her body had been extensively scratched by fingernails. Both the murder of Cullen and the fact no individual who had observed the child attempting to flee from her abductor alongside Interstate 490 had attempted to offer her any assistance generated intense public outrage. 2 New York newspapers, the Times-Union and the Democrat and Chronicle, initially offered a combined reward of $2,500 for information leading to the arrest and conviction of her murderer, and all information each publication received was relayed to police. Numerous local businesses and residents added private donations to the reward fund, gradually leading the sum to exceed $6,000. Although police interrogated several suspects in the months following Cullen's murder, all were cleared of involvement, and by December 21, the number of investigators assigned to the case on a full-time basis was decreased to 3. In early 1972, 5 large billboards were erected alongside major Rochester expressways. Each bore an 8-foot high picture of the child alongside the headline, "Do you know who killed Carmen Cullen?" Free use of these billboards was given for 1 month by the Rochester Outdoor Advertising Company. Each offered a $6,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of Cullen's murderer or murderers, in addition to displaying the telephone hotline number and postal address. Each established the previous November to encourage the public to submit anonymous information. Although this tactic generated several new leads, all failed to bear fruit. 17 months later, at approximately 5 p.m. on April 2, 1973, 11-year-old Wanda Walkowicz disappeared from the east side of Rochester while returning home from an errand. According to the owner of the delicatessen Walkowicz had been instructed to visit, the child had purchased the groceries she had been instructed to buy at approximately 5:15 p.m. Before she had begun walking alone down Conkey Avenue, Walkowicz was reported missing by her mother, Joyce, at 8 p.m. Police immediately launched an intense search to locate Walkowicz. Almost 50 detectives searched several square miles of the terrain around her home, the delicatessen, and areas around the Genesee River, where she had been known to play. These searches failed to locate the child, although several neighborhood residents recalled observing Walkowicz struggling to carry the bag of groceries. Walking just north of Avenue B, 3 classmates specifically observed her bending the bag against a fence so that she could improve her grip as a brown vehicle drove past her. Walkowicz's fully clothed body was found by a police officer at 10:15 a.m. the following day, discarded at the base of a hillside alongside an access road to State Route 104 in Webster, approximately 7 miles from Rochester. The position of her body indicated she had likely been thrown from a moving vehicle, with her body rolling down the embankment. An autopsy revealed she had been sexually assaulted, then strangled from behind with a ligature, most likely a belt. Several defensive wounds indicated Walkowicz had fought her murderer. In addition, her body had been redressed after death. The autopsy also revealed traces of semen and pubic hair upon the child's body. Furthermore, several strands of white cat fur were found upon her clothing. Although the Walkowicz family did not own a pet with fur of this color, as had been the case with Carmen Cullen, investigators established an anonymous telephone hotline, in addition to distributing numerous flyers throughout Rochester, appealing for information. A reward of $10,000 for information leading to the arrest and conviction of Walkowicz's murder was also established. These police inquiries produced an eyewitness who informed investigators that as Walkowicz had walked home from the delicatessen on the evening of April 2, he had observed the child standing alongside the door of a large brown vehicle, conversing with the driver. This eyewitness was unable to obtain a clear view of the occupant of the vehicle, although the location of this sighting was just 0.2 of a mile from the Walkowicz's home. Another individual who contacted investigators following the installation of the anonymous hotline informed investigators she had observed a man forcing a red-haired girl, matching Walkowicz's description, into a light-colored Dodge Dart on Conkey Avenue between 5:30 p.m. and 6 p.m. on the evening of her disappearance. The Rochester Police Department dismissed any suggestion of a link between the murders of Cullen and Walkowicz, although a sheriff's sergeant who had been assigned to investigate Cullen's murder, by this stage still an open, although largely inactive case, was reassigned to the task force implemented to investigate the murder of Walkowicz. In September 1973, local television network Woker announced plans to broadcast a televised reconstruction of Walkowicz's abduction and subsequent recovery of her body. This 30-minute episode was broadcast on 21 October, accompanied by public appeals for witnesses to contact authorities. Although this program resulted in the Rochester Police Department receiving over 200 calls from the public, no useful leads were gained. 7 months later, on the evening of November 26, 1973, 11-year-old Michelle Maenza was reported missing by her mother, Carolyn, after she failed to return home from school. Subsequent investigations would determine Maenza was last seen by her classmates at approximately 3:20 p.m., walking alone en route to a shopping plaza located close to her school, with the intention of retrieving a purse her mother had left inside a store within the plaza earlier that day. Approximately 10 minutes later, a witness observed Maenza sitting in the passenger seat of a beige or tan vehicle traveling at high speed on Ackerman Street before turning onto Webster Avenue. According to this witness, the child had been weeping. At 5:30 p.m. on November 26, a motorist observed a man standing standing by a large beige or tan vehicle with a flat tire, parked alongside Route 350 in the town of Walworth, holding a girl he strongly believed to be Michelle Maenza by the wrist. When this motorist had stopped to offer assistance, the individual had deliberately grabbed the girl and pushed her behind his back, also obscuring his license plate from the motorist's view as he stared in his direction with such a menacing expression on his face that the motorist had felt compelled to drive away. Maenza's fully clothed body was discovered at 10:30 a.m. on November 28, lying face down in a ditch alongside a rural road in Macedon, approximately 15 miles from Rochester. Her autopsy revealed that, in addition to receiving extensive blunt force trauma to her body, Maenza had been raped, then strangled to death from behind with a ligature, possibly a thin rope. Numerous strands of white cat fur were discovered upon her clothing, and leaf samples matching the foliage where her body was discovered were recovered from within one of her clenched hands, indicating she had likely been strangled to death at or near the location where she was found. Investigators were able to retrieve a partial palm print from her neck and traces of semen upon her body and underwear. A forensic analysis of the semen samples determined she had been raped by one individual. An analysis of the contents of Maenza's stomach revealed traces of a hamburger and onions, which had been consumed approximately 1 hour before her murder, giving credence to earlier reports of a girl matching Maenza's description having been seen in the company of a Caucasian man with dark hair, aged between 25 and 35, approximately 6 feet 0 in tall and weighing 165 lb, both at a fast food restaurant in the town of Penfield at approximately 4:30 on the afternoon of her disappearance, and alongside Route 350 approximately 1 hour later. Carmen Cullen, Wanda Walkowicz, and Michelle Maenza were each laid to rest in Rochester's Holy Sepulchre Cemetery. Cullen's funeral was conducted on November 22, 1971. Her funeral mass was attended by 200 mourners. Walkowicz was laid to rest on April 6, 1973. She was laid to rest in a small white and gold casket, following a service officiated by the Reverend Benedict Amon. Maenza's funeral was held at the Corpus Christi Church on December 1, 1973. Her open casket funeral service was attended by scores of mourners. At the conclusion of Michelle's funeral service, her father, Christopher Maenza, stated to other mourners, "She was a sweet little girl." All 3 child murders generated intense public outrage. Each received intense publicity. Following the murder of Michelle Maenza, investigators released a composite drawing of the individual, seen with the child by numerous witnesses to the media. So installed a telephone hotline, exclusively devoted to the manhunt for the perpetrator, whom they strongly suspected had committed all 3 murders. Anonymity was again offered to any caller offering information, and a reward was again offered for any information leading to the arrest and conviction of the perpetrator. Although these efforts resulted in numerous calls from the public, no credible suspect was located. Although investigators interrogated more than 800 potential suspects in relation to the Alphabet murders, the perpetrator or perpetrators of the homicides was never caught, and the case remains unsolved, as each child hailed from a poor Catholic family, had few friends, and had recently experienced issues such as bullying or poor academic performance at her school. Investigators have not discounted the possibility the murderer may have been employed by or held knowledge of the practices of a social service agency in his efforts to initiate contact with or gain the trust of each victim. Thank you for watching. And these are twisted cases you can watch.